Hello, good evening, and welcome to the program. This is Daily Politics on Trust TV. I'm Abdullahi Ahmed. Tonight, tensions are rising in Adamawa State over the controversy surrounding the possible stripping of former Vice President Atiku Abubakar of his traditional title, the Waziri of Adamawa. Now, the move has sparked heated debate across political and cultural circles, with critics accusing the Fintra administration of politicizing traditional rule. But the state government insists its actions are guided solely by public interest and due process. Well, join us tonight to shed some light on this development and the government's position is the Adamawa State Commissioner for Information, Honorable James Ilia. We'll be asking the question, is this about tradition, politics, or power play? And what does it actually mean for the state's stability and unity? Well, in case you're missing out on this development, let's just bring you up to speed with some of the developments around some of those reforms and what the details are about what the state legislature is actually considering as part of those reforms regarding what might be considered administrative legality of who is actually going to take responsibility if there is an actual case of incapacitation. So let's quickly have a look at some of those pieces of legislation and what they actually say. Well, one of that is that once appointed, the appointed prince. Well, this is actually a precursor. Let's take a look at the first part of it, where the provision talks about the appointment of someone that would take charge of the administration of an emirate or a chiefdom if there is a case of incapacitation. Well, the governor may appoint one of the princes from the ruling houses to act in place of an incapacitated chief/emir during the period of incapacitation. But what's the next phase of that provision? Well, the next one says, if a chief or emir is absent or has absented himself from official functions 3 times consecutively or more, absents himself 3 times within a 12-month period due to ill health, the governor may take action as provided under Section 6F of this law. I remind you that this law is still pretty much being debated in the Adamawa State House of Assembly. It has successfully scaled second reading. Let's take a look at the last part. Well, this is the last, the other part that talks about once appointed, the appointed prince shall take up all the duties and functions of the incapacitated chief/emir, and the prince shall cease to act immediately if the chief or emir, as the case may be, is certified recovered by a medical doctor from a government hospital. And also, the prince shall also stop acting if the chief or emir resigns or vacates the stool for any reason. Now, it seems like an open and shut case, right? But there is a lot of nuances that has accompanied this particular conversation. Why the likes of Atiku Abubakar have joined the conversation is because of a separate memo that emerged from the Ministry of Local Government and Chieftaincy Affairs that talks about indigenization of kingmakers. As you know, the Waziri of Adamawa is Atiku Abubakar, and the question is, does he then lose his position if he is not an indigene of the Yola Emirate? That is the big question. That is the suspicion that has trailed this particular development. The state government says it has got nothing to do with the likes of Atiku Abubakar. He doesn't lose his position. But critics are saying a lot has been changing too much, too fast. And the Fintra administration obviously has an ulterior motive for all of the changes that has been happening recently. Case in point, the balkanization of some of the emirates and chiefdoms. As you may notice, this year, February, some of those chiefdoms have come to exist because of the Fintra administration's move to further bring some of the cultural identity or ethnicity of people to light because of those new chiefdoms as well as emirates that were inaugurated in February this year. So let's get some more insight about this one. Join us virtually from Yola is the Commissioner for Information. Honorable James Ilia is joining us virtually via Zoom for an insightful conversation about the facts of the matter. Do we have Honorable James on the line? Hello, Honorable James, can you hear me? Honorable James, if you can hear me, we need you to unmute your mic so that you can have, we can hear you from this side. All right, we're going to work on that audio to try and get Honorable James Iliya into the conversation. He's the Commissioner for Information. We just need you, Honorable James, if you can hear me, to unmute the microphone so that we can listen to what you are going to say about this obvious controversy that is still unfolding in Adamawa. Just help us unmute the microphone so we can have a conversation. Honorable James, if you can hear me. All right. Well, we're going to circle back on that. Let's take a breather and turn our attention now to a different conversation that we'd planned to have much later on the program. We'll circle back to Honorable James Iliya in just a moment when we sort out that technical issue. You might also be aware that there is another twist in the conversation around the leadership struggle within the PDP, because that crisis is deepening within the People's Democratic Party following a dramatic U-turn by the National Executive Committee. The NEC has now reinstated Senator Samuel Anyanwu as National Secretary of the PDP. However, we've been hearing a lot of grumblings from within the National Working Committee, because a letter has become public now from a section of the National Working Committee that are rejecting this new development. The PDP just 24 hours ago paid a visit to the INEC headquarters. Well, you have the PDP Governors Forum and the leadership of the PDP paying a visit to the INEC headquarters against the backdrop of that letter from INEC that pretty much disregarded the NEC meeting, the 100th NEC meeting of the PDP that is coming up, which is going to be a precursor to its convention. If INEC doesn't recognize some of these developments, it obviously means that the PDP will be left with quite the legal quagmire to deal with. So in an effort to, I guess, address some of these challenges, they decided to reinstate Anyanwu, or at least accept him, is the right way to put it. The FCT minister has had his say about this one, saying that, listen, it is not even in the position of the acting chairman of the PDP to reinstate Senator Anyanwu back in the position of National Secretary, because it is obvious that, according to him, that is the legal position. But what does this mean for the PDP? It clearly means that there is quite a lot to unpack. Let's bring in our analyst. He's the group political editor of Media Trust. Mr. Clement Oloyede is joining us for this conversation to help us make sense of the chaos that is the PDP leadership crisis. As always, a pleasure to see you. Thank you so much for stopping by this evening. It's quite a busy day, I suppose, for you, looking at everything that's happening politically. But help us understand the various positions and, how we can make sense of the sequence of events.
Yeah, Abdullahi, thank you very much for having me, viewers. It's another day in the chapter of the crisis that have bedeviled the ruling party, the former ruling party, the People's Democratic Party, since 2015 when it left power. And it's quite unfortunate how the mighty has fallen, or as some that are still optimistic will say how the mighty is falling. What transpired today was supposed to be like a step forward in the resolution of the crisis. But before I delve into it, in your introduction, I would like to make some correction. You said the NEC reinstated Anyanwu.
In the National Working Committee.
Yeah, that is not correct. What happened today was Damagun, the acting national chairman, announced that Anyanwu has been reinstated. The NEC meeting that I held last month, the 99th meeting, deferred every discussion over the secretaryship until the 100th NEC meeting, which was supposed to hold on June 30th, but according to Damagun, is not going to hold. But Damagun, we believe, is not acting as an emperor, so to say. He's not the only decision maker, because when he was briefing today, he was in company of He was
the
a
PDP Governors Forum
PDP
chairman.
Governors Forum chairman, Bala Mohammed, and it's believed that his briefing, what he came out to announce today, was aftermath of his meeting with some party leaders that met with INEC chairman yesterday. But just like you rightly mentioned, just a few hours after he announced Anyanwu is back, 11 National Working Committee members issued a counter statement. The association themselves from this and insisting that Anyanwu is not back, and further insisting that the June 30th NEC meeting we hold. How do you make sense of all this? Is, as a few minutes ago, as a former governor of Benue put it, Senator Gabriel Suzwan, is a quagmire that is not needed, that the party has found itself. And it's so unfortunate that when you think the party is taking a step forward, it takes about 3 steps backwards. 11 out of, I think the NWC members should be about 16 or 17. I can't remember off my head. But if 11 is a majority of the NWC members, if that number, including the deputy national chairman South and almost all the national vice chairman across the zones, if they could come together and take this position, it shows that the house is, that we thought is being mended, is further divided. Because from the feelers we gather from the secretariat of the party today, the Damagun was supposed to meet with the NWC members before the briefing. In fact, Damagun himself alluded to that during his briefing, but the reports that they did not show up. And them not showing up is obvious, is a fallout on what Damagun had earlier done. If you recall, earlier in the week, Debo Ologunagba, the National Publicity Secretary, issued a statement that the NEC will continue. We hold as scheduled. And a few hours later, Damagun rebuffed that and said nobody should pay attention to the spokesman of his party, that he was speaking without authority. The 11 members that issued a counter statement to Damagun today, or earlier before Damagun's statement today, they already issued another statement saying that they stand by what Ologunagba said. Afterwards, Damagun issued this statement. So if you put all this together, it shows that the victory, the solution is still far from what we are being seen. And to put it in further perspective, earlier when this started, people were saying that, okay, this is a victory for the weaker faction of the crisis. But the fight back from the NWC, the 11 NWC members, is pointing to further rifts. It's pointing to the fact that a section of the governors of the party, believed to be led by Oyo State Governor Seyi Makinde, is also still holding firm by controlling a very large percentage of the NWC members and insisting that no, for any decision to be made on the national secretary, it has to be at the NEC meeting.
Right.
And at the NEC meeting, lest we forget, after the last meeting, before the 99th NEC meeting, the Southeast Caucus of the PDP, Zonal Caucus, had issued their position and said, okay, Sunday Ude
is their choice.
Is their choice. And they are bringing his name forward again. When they were issuing that, they added a threat to it that if their position is not respected, they may be forced to leave the party and consider this. So the 99th NEC meeting was supposed to look at that issue. But because of these legal uncertainties around the 99th, because the 99th NEC meeting also had its own legal issue. Recall that just a few hours before the NEC meeting, the secretariat was sealed owing to ground rent, but it was still around that period that the Supreme Court gave its judgment that the Anyanwu loyalists, the wicked loyalists, are claiming reinstated Anyanwu. And don't forget, INEC is clear with its directives. For any NEC meeting notice to be issued, it must be countersigned by the chairman and the secretary.
Right. And Anyanwu is the INEC recognized secretary,
yes,
isn't it?
As far, it's difficult to say categorically that Anyanwu is the recognized secretary. Because if you hear what the INEC chairman himself said yesterday, within the space of 2-3 months, PDP has written to INEC almost 4 times, nominating, nominating different people. At the point, they said it's Anyanwu. They wrote again and said, no, Anyanwu is no longer the one. Ude Okoye is the secretary. Later they wrote and said, no, Anyanwu is back as the secretary. Later they said, no, Setonji is now the acting secretary. And then afterwards, there's a Supreme Court judgment that was served on them. So it's difficult to say. INEC is also being clever not to be seen to have taken a position and say that, so that people will not go to the market and say, no, it's INEC that is now appointing
but
a
is it not
secretary.
also easy to connect the dots? The meeting with INEC yesterday and then today's announcement by Damagun, isn't it safe to say that they got some sort of inclination that the best way is to adopt Senator Anyanwu as their national secretary? Oh yes,
there's no doubt that. I'm just telling you that INEC is being clever not to be caught directing parties on who the official is going to be. INEC is building his position on the decision of the Supreme Court. And the interpretation of the Supreme Court judgment, according to INEC, is that Anyanwu was never removed. That is how they interpreted it. And by that, if you hear what Damagun said today, that is a bitter pill for them to swallow. That's reinstating Anyanwu is a bitter pill. But because of their interaction with INEC, the feelers they got from interaction with INEC yesterday was that go by the Supreme Court judgment. And INEC's interpretation of the Supreme Court judgment was that Anyanwu remains your party secretary. And it's clear, based on the interpretation along those lines, is that for a national secretary to be removed, it has to be by the neck. The neck is sometimes some people even argue that even the neck cannot unilaterally remove the national secretary, arguing that the national secretary was voted in at the convention.
Right.
Meaning that it's only at the convention, it's only if he resigned voluntarily, but if it's to be removed, that it has to go through the convention. So that is why at the last NEC meeting they were saying that, okay, let's defer every decision on the secretary to the 100th listening, with the hope that the Saraki committee that were put in place will have met with both parties and come with a position. And what we heard is that the Saraki committee had also agreed with the Supreme Court judgment that Anyanwu remains.
Which, the governors pushed back a little bit when the Saraki committee, made that public, that they are recommending Anyanwu return as national secretary. But clearly the governors have, done a 180 on this one. You had Governor Bala Mohammed, alongside Damagun when he was making that particular announcement. What do you think informed their turnaround in what appears to be a support for the return of Anyanwu as national secretary?
It's difficult to really, politicians, their minds is only known to them alone. At a point, Governor Bala Mohammed of Bauchi, the chairman of the PDP government, was one of the loudest voices against Anyanwu's return. So it was a bit sketchy to see that now he's now on the path of Anyanwu's return. But if I'm to act as his devil's advocate, perhaps he's looking at it that the only way for them to actually hold a NEC meeting is to get Anyanwu back on seat for him to issue the notice for the meeting. At least when they now get to the NEC meeting, the majority can have its way. If Anyanwu is going to be removed, at least we must even call this meeting first before we can decide this matter. And the only way to call the meeting is for the chairman and the secretary to sign the notice. Because as it stands today, based on the Supreme Court judgment, if any other person signs the notice alongside Anyanwu, the wicked group has vowed that they are going to challenge it in court.
And what about Debo's point that INEC does not get to decide when a political party holds its meeting, that it's a privilege for the parties to let INEC know that we're holding the NEC meeting, but as far as the constitution goes, the party has a right to operate with certain autonomy.
Yes. Debo is actually not wrong, but it's also not 100% correct. Why do I say that? While it is not it is not a mandatory provision that INEC must give clearance. In fact, I think it's being misinterpreted in a way. INEC does not give clearance for a NEC meeting to hold. The notice is to notify INEC that we are going to hold a NEC meeting. And the notice is where it becomes legally binding. Is that whatever decision you make at that NEC meeting, you are supposed to send the report to INEC. So if INEC has not been notified, it will not agree with whatever decision you make. It will say it's not aware of that meeting. So that is the position it is now. And on that note, some disgruntled party members can challenge the position. INEC had this issue. Let's not forget the ruling party itself in Zamfara had this issue when it lost almost all its elected, even in most recent cases, PDP in Plateau State.
Right.
So it's not that a lot of people have always assumed that INEC presence is mandated at primaries. No. I'm talking about primary elections now. No. What the law says is that INEC must be notified. So that when you are bringing the reports or the decision taken at those meetings, either primaries or NEC meeting or convention, INEC can now say legally we were informed. And these are the reports brought from that meeting. So we are going to use it to update whatever information we have. For instance, if the PDP NWC goes ahead with the NEC meeting, and at that NEC meeting it resolved, for instance, that Anyanwu is no longer the secretary and that Ude Okoye, whoever has now been appointed, they have to send that report to INEC for INEC to update his record. And the same INEC you want to send a report to is now saying that I'm not aware of any NEC meeting because your NEC meeting notice must be signed based on law. That is the fact of the law. It must be signed by these two parties. But the one you sent to me was only signed by one, which is not legally binding.
What do you make of this pushback by the 11 signatories of the National Working Committee? I mean, you have the Deputy National Chairman South, you have the Acting National Secretary, you have the National Treasurer, the National Auditor, the National Publicity Secretary, the National Vice Chairman Southeast, the Caretaker Committee Chairman South-South, the Women Leader, the National Vice Chairman Northwest, and the National Vice Chairman Southwest. I mean, these are considerable members of the National Working Committee. What do you make of their position regarding reinstatement of Senator Anyanwu back into the position of the National Secretary?
No doubt about this. Their position is fueled by the division in the Governors Forum itself. Don't forget, I said, or we all know earlier that there are insinuations that Governor Seyi Makinde is the leader of another group that is opposed to the position of the group led by Nyesom Wike. Wike himself alluded to that. And these 11 NWC members, to be respectful to their positions, they are being firm on the position they have always advocated. Don't forget, they were all together to agree that Honorable Setonji should
continue
as
acting National Secretary.
And they were at the NEC meeting where they all agreed that any decision on the secretary's issue will be deferred to the next NEC. And this next NEC is supposed to be June 30th. So it's one way you can say that they are right to insist that no, we must stick by the NEC meeting. But the other part where ordinary Nigerians will find it curious is that if you go ahead with the NEC meeting as you are planning to do, if you are insisting that Anyanwu is not the secretary as you're saying, whatever decision you make at the NEC meeting, if you go ahead and hold it, INEC will not recognize it. Right. And if INEC does not recognize it, where do you go with that?
And that is the big issue that is looming large, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, PDP cannot move forward without addressing this particular issue. And it appears that Anyanwu is the key, isn't it?
He is. He's like a bone in the neck of the party at the moment. But like some leaders of the party have said, this all boils down to leadership. I think credibility and integrity and clarity is very, very important in addressing this issue. Leaders should not be seen to be towing this line and walking a different path. There should be some consensus. People should put aside private ego. They should put aside individual ego and look at what works for this party. The only thing that works for this party is for them to be able to meet and resolve this issue. So if even if it's to meet at some people will argue that if it's to meet at a point, for instance, if Damagun had met with the NWC members and said, okay, guys, you don't want Anyanwu. Okay. The only way for us to get rid of Anyanwu is for us to hold NEC meeting. Can we come together and agree that Anyanwu should be back? And under the condition that we're asking to sign a notice of NEC meeting. When we get to that NEC meeting, you can bring forward your reasons and canvas. The majority always have its way. But that will now make them meet at a point.
Doesn't the National Secretary also co-signs the agenda of the NEC? So if Anyanwu, for instance, is back and accepted by everybody, doesn't he also get to see what is on the agenda?
But there's always AOB. There's always AOB.
Right.
There's any other business, even if it's not listed as part of this thing, if it's considered a matter of, imagine if the Governors Forum, which is a very important caucus in the party structure, or the BOT, decide at that meeting that no, we have seen the agenda you drafted, but with this, we want to include this issue in it. So long there's a quorum formed by the NEC, I think whatever decision they make at that place can be considered binding.
Right.
So I felt that for this to have a solution, all parties involved must drop ego and find a meeting point. And the meeting point is that NEC meeting must hold. It may not be the June 30th, but it must hold as soon as possible.
Damagun did say there's going to be a meeting of the working committee.
He is calling it a caucus meeting, an extended caucus meeting. Caucus meeting cannot resolve this crisis.
But do you see it ironing out this standoff, especially the one that is within the National Working Committee itself?
I don't see it. I think if anything, except they do some house cleaning before this so-called caucus meeting and arrive, like I'm saying, I still strongly believe that the NWC should have met before they start all these brickbats. Should have met and find a way to meet at there are obviously two groups now. It's just to find a meeting point. You can't have it all, I can't have it all. What are you willing to give? What am I willing to give? We find a meeting point so that this party, just like Damagun said, FCT polls is coming. They cannot nominate candidate for the election with the way the things are. Every single communication must be signed by whoever is the secretary, whoever is the recognized secretary. So are they willing to throw the baby and the bathwater away because of the crisis that already cost you the presidential election in 2023, that cost you all the national, that cost you all the
state governments,
two state governments now, that has cost you the, I was going to refer to Plateau, that cost you all the legislative houses, because all these crises are still the offshoots of everything. And I know probably this is not part of what you wanted, but when you were introducing your earlier topic earlier, the Adamawa Traditional Institute, from the political point of view, whatever the governor is doing, it may be justified doing it. But from the political point of view, political analysts cannot dissociate the crisis in PDP from what is happening in Adamawa itself. It's obvious that at a certain point, the governor and Waziri Adamawa Atiku Abubakar seems to have fallen apart, which has already caused a crack. People believe that the governor of Adamawa is more aligned to the cause of Nyesom Wike, who has seen himself as a sworn enemy to Atiku Abubakar. So even if the governor is doing this as structural, systematic reforms in this thing, you cannot dissociate the political development. And this is the problems that comes. Now a party problem, right or wrong, can now be translated into a traditional institutional problem and create a bigger problem.
Right.
So it is beyond winning election. Now look at it now. It's going beyond winning election. People in Adamawa are reading new meaning to the crisis in PDP to now affect their traditional institute. They are claiming that no. Because, like I said, some are already claiming that it is because of the crisis in PDP that they are having this problem in Adamawa at the same time.
I believe you're working on a big story, and we can't wait to read all the details, because we understand that there are some clandestine meetings right there that have been taking that are still taking place.
I really need to, we need to get ready for tomorrow's paper.
Obviously. Clement, as always, thank you so much for the insight.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate you very much for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
We're going to take a moment. I believe we have Honorable James Ilia on the line. Join us in just a moment as we circle back to the conversation about the reforms in Adamawa State and how it is fast becoming political. Join us after the break.